empires are not controlled by armies alone. They are controlled by debt. What if the real weapon of the British Empire was not guns, but loans? Winning a war is temporary. Controlling debt is permanent. The British Empire did not just conquer nations, it made them pay for it. When people think about empires, they imagine armies, battles, conquests, flags planted on distant lands. But the real power of empire often came after the war. It came through money, more specifically through debt. Debt did not just finance expansion, it controlled outcomes, it shaped economies, it locked entire societies into systems they could not easily escape. This is the hidden story of the British Empire. To understand this, start with one key idea. War is expensive. Armies need pay, ships need fuel, weapons need production. No empire can expand without funding. Britain solved this problem differently from many others. It built a powerful system of public credit. This system allowed the state to borrow large sums at relatively low cost. Investors trusted the government. They bought bonds. This created a stable flow of capital. Now look at what this meant. Britain could fight longer wars. It could sustain global campaigns. It could outlast rivals. This was not just military strength. It was financial strength. Now consider the structure. The government borrowed money. It used that money to fund war and expansion. After victory, the costs did not disappear. They were transferred. Often, they were pushed onto colonies. Now examine how this worked in practice. Start with India. India became one of the most important parts of the empire. Control began through the East India Company. At first, it was a commercial entity. It traded goods. But over time, it gained political power. It raised armies, it controlled territory. Now look at revenue. To sustain control, the system needed income. This came from land taxes. Land revenue became central. Farmers paid taxes. These taxes funded administration and military presence. They also supported further expansion. This created a cycle. Revenue funded control, control secured revenue. Now consider the impact. Local economies were reshaped. Agriculture adjusted to meet revenue demands. Economic pressure increased, but political power remained limited. Now look at debt again. Wars in India were funded through borrowing. After wars, the financial burden did not stay in Britain alone. It spread across the empire. Now move to China. The Opium Wars changed the relationship between China and Britain. After military defeat, China faced financial obligations. Indemnities had to be paid. Trade concessions were granted. Ports were opened. This was not just a military outcome. It was financial control. Debt and payments created long-term dependency. Now consider the structure. Military victory created leverage. Leverage created financial obligations. Financial obligations created control. Now move to Egypt. Egypt borrowed heavily for development projects. Debt levels rose. When Egypt struggled to repay, foreign powers stepped in. Financial oversight began. Control of finances led to control of policy. Eventually, this led to occupation. Again, the pattern repeats. Debt creates entry. Entry creates influence. Influence creates control. Now step back. Look at the larger system. The British Empire combined finance and force. It used debt to fund expansion. It used control to secure repayment. It used repayment to sustain the system. This created a fiscal military structure. Now consider investors. British bonds were attractive. They offered stable returns. This connected private wealth to imperial expansion. Investors benefited from empire. Empire depended on investors. Now examine taxation. Colonies often faced heavy tax burdens. They had limited political representation. Revenue flowed outward. This created imbalance. Now consider currency and trade. Colonies were integrated into a global system. Trade patterns were shaped by imperial needs. Raw materials flowed out, finished goods flowed in. Financial flows supported the structure. Now look at enforcement. Debt obligations were not optional. They were enforced through policy, pressure, and sometimes force. This made debt a tool of discipline. Now consider the long-term effect. Debt relationships outlasted wars. They shaped economies for decades. They influenced political decisions. They limited independence. Now examine the deeper pattern. Debt is not just financial. It is structural. It creates relationships of power. It defines who owes and who controls. Now compare with modern systems. Sovereign debt still plays a major role. Countries borrow from markets. They borrow from institutions. Repayment conditions influence policy. This shows continuity. The tools have changed. The structure remains. Now consider global finance. Capital flows across borders. Investors seek returns. Governments seek funding. This creates interconnected systems. Now examine risk. High debt creates vulnerability. If repayment becomes difficult, external influence increases. This can affect policy choices. Now consider development. Debt can fund growth, infrastructure, education, industry, but it can also create dependence. This depends on how it is managed. Now look at power again. Power is not only about resources or military strength, it is about control over financial systems, control over credit, control over repayment structures. Now reflect on history. The British Empire used debt as a strategic tool, not only to fund expansion, but to maintain influence. Now consider one key insight. Winning a war is one moment. Controlling finances is long-term. Debt extends power beyond the battlefield. Now look at modern relevance. Global financial systems still shape power dynamics. Countries with strong credit systems have advantages. They can borrow cheaply. They can influence global markets. Now consider inequality. Debt relationships can create imbalance. Stronger economies lend. Weaker economies borrow. This creates asymmetry. Now examine solutions. Transparency, better governance, balanced agreements. These can reduce risks, but the structure remains complex. Now return to the main idea. Debt is not neutral. It carries power. It creates obligations. It shapes outcomes. If you want clear insights into economics, history, and the hidden systems of global power, subscribe to The Financial Story. We break down complex topics into simple ideas, so you understand how the world really works. Now think about the core lesson. The British Empire did not rely on armies. It relied on finance. Debt funded expansion. Debt enforced control. Debt shaped entire economies. This created a system where financial dependence followed political control. The story of empire is not only written in battles, it is written in balance sheets. It is written in loans, taxes, and obligations. Debt can build, debt can control, debt can last longer than war. Understanding this changes how you see history, and how you see the modern world. Because even today, the relationship between money and power continues to shape global systems.